This episode is sponsored by Therapy Notes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Hello, friends. I'm Gordon Brewer, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast. And this is episode number 286 of the podcast, and I'm looking forward to you hearing from a particular person that tells her story about going into private practice, and that is Janet Bayramyan. I'm so glad for you to hear from Janet. And, you know, one of the things when I started this podcast was I just really, the main reason in starting it was just hearing people's different stories and experiences around being in private practice and learning different aspects of that and how you can do all of it better. And, so in many ways, my interview with Janet's getting back to some of the basics with my purpose of the podcast. And Janet was just a delight to talk to and love for you to hear her story about her private practice journey. And real quickly, before we get to my conversation with Janet, I'd love for you to go over and check out the podcasting workshop that I've put together. And you can go to practiceoftherapy.com/podcast workshop. And with this particular free, piece of content or a free thing is that it's an email workshop in that you'll get about 6 or 7 emails from me with videos embedded, and you can watch those videos and learn all the steps of starting a podcast. You know, one of the things about this particular media is that it is really growing. And the one thing about podcasting too is it's really kind of beginning to take over the whole concept of blogging, in that you can accomplish the same thing through your spoken voice or through videos or through podcasting and that sort of thing, of getting your message and things out. So I invite you to go over to practiceoftherapy.com/podcast workshop to sign up for this free email workshop that you can get and walk you through all the steps of starting a podcast if that's something that you've maybe been thinking about doing. And really with those particular lessons, I start out with, you know, the different reasons why you might want to start a podcast. So I invite you to go over and check all that out. practiceoftherapy.com/podcast workshop. You know, I think podcasting has really changed my life and certainly changed the trajectory of the people that I've come in contact with and people that have really developed some lifelong friends out of podcasting. So be sure and check that resource out. And also, real quickly here before we get to my conversation with Janet, I'd love for you to hear from one of our members of the Psychcraft network. And you can find out more about it by going to psychcraftnetwork.com, not Practice of Therapy, but psychcraftnetwork.com. But you'll get to hear from one of the members of that network and also a message from our sponsor of the podcast, Therapy Notes.
Hey there. If we haven't met, my name is Lisa Mustard, and I'm the person behind the scenes of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard, a podcast where I interview seasoned and knowledgeable talk therapists from the counseling world to glean valuable insights, techniques, and tools that you can apply to your practice and your life. Plus, you can also earn continuing education contact hours from some of my episodes. So, to learn more about the show and get your first continuing education contact hour for free, head on over to my site, lisamustard.com.
One of the keys to a successful private practice is having the right systems and processes in place to make things run as smoothly as possible. With a system like Therapy Notes, you'll have more time to spend with what matters most, your clients. Therapy Notes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. Your clinical records will be secure with less paperwork, which means you can give a much better quality of care. It's the EHR that Gordon uses in his practice. Be sure to check them out today by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes and be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free.
Hello, folks, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm happy for you to get to know today Janet Bayramyan. As I start with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little bit more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. So I'm in Los Angeles, California. I've been in private practice since 2019. It was always my dream to become a therapist, to support people in their journeys, to have my own business. You know, I am very much someone that really values freedom and making my own decisions. So I don't know really where to start with my journey, but I think part of my story is that I decided to become a therapist because, you know, I had, like probably a lot of therapists, my own issues in life that I needed to work out, that I'm still working out. And I had, you know, really amazing clinicians that supported me in my own journey, that continue to support me. And I just thought, you know what, I want to give back as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think with most of us in this field, we go into it because we've dealt with some of our own issues and things. And I would say if we didn't have issues, there would be no therapists or any of us that have gone into it. If we didn't have our own issues, we wouldn't be in it. So I think that's really, really very true. So I know that your kind of your specialty is working with trauma and that sort of thing, as you shared with me. But have you always been in private practice, or did you make a transition along the way?
I made a transition along the way. I've had experiences working in group practices during my associate, like pre-licensed years. I also worked at an agency type of setting. So I guess I can say I've paid my dues a little bit. But yeah, I haven't always been in private practice. That's, more of a recent experience for me.
Right. So when you got out of school and I'm assuming went into agency work, was your goal at that point to get into private practice, or was it more of an afterthought?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was my goal from the get-go. I was someone that I didn't know anything about how to run a business. Grad school, of course, they don't teach us that. And when I started, working at an agency, I also wanted to gain experience in private practice. So I actually did link up with a private practice psychologist who allowed me to work with her part-time in addition to me working at an agency. So I was very busy, but I knew that I wanted not just the agency experience, but I also wanted the private practice experience in tandem.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to do that. I think not to give up your day job too quickly, as I like to say, to make that transition. So what was that transition like for you? How did you know when you were ready to do full-time private practice?
Yeah, I think I played it safe for a while because I'm the sole income earner for myself. So I needed to have sort of a steady thing going on. So after agency work, I became licensed and knew that agency work was no longer for me. So I transitioned into some different group practice work. I did another corporate job as well, working behind the scenes at an insurance company. And I'm really grateful for all of those experiences. But again, I realized that it just wasn't for me.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really happy. And in the group practices, I really learned a lot. I learned, a lot about what factors to consider in terms of being in private practice. I also learned what I thought some of the group practice owners did well and what they also didn't do very well. And so I think I got to see both sides essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for a while until, my caseload started building and a lot of people were asking for me personally in terms of their requests. So I just knew, okay, maybe it's time. And when COVID happened, it was, of course, a tragedy around the world. A lot of negative experiences were happening, but I felt like the silver lining was that more and more people were open to going to therapy that maybe wouldn't have had before. So a lot of therapists became so busy during that time, during the height of COVID. And so I just, I felt confident. I said to myself, I think I can do this. More and more people are ready to go to therapy. They're looking for therapists, they're willing to pay for it or they're willing to look at their insurances. So that was around the time when I made the full-time transition.
Awesome. Awesome. So I take it that you're more insurance. Are you insurance based in your practice?
I'm actually a little bit of both. I primarily take self-pay, but I have associates in my practice that primarily see insurance clients. Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. So when you made that transition, did you bring on associates immediately or did you do solo work for a while?
That was interesting. So I worked solo for probably about a year and a lot of referrals were still coming in, which was great. I was happy that a lot of people were interested in therapy, but I had to turn people away because there's only so many clients that I can see in a day. And I thought to myself, maybe I shouldn't turn people away. Maybe I can grow my practice and grow my team so that I don't have to turn people away. And so that's really how that evolved. I also for a while knew that I wanted to be a mentor, in private practice. So that was another factor in my decision making to bring on associates. Because again, in my experience, I had both really great supervisors and supervisors that I felt weren't so great for me.
Right.
So I knew that I also wanted to give back in that way and, hopefully be a really positive, supportive, educating clinical supervisor. So that was also an important factor in my decision to expand.
Sure, sure. So most of the people that you've brought on, have they been like pre-licensed people and you're supervising them through the process as part of your practice?
Yes, absolutely. So I take on pre-licensed clinician. They work under my license. I'm their supervisor and they too are gaining experience in private practice. They too are gaining experience in trauma work and growing clinically and professionally. And I'm really enjoying guiding them through that process.
Yeah, I think that's a great way for folks that are maybe going into group practice. That's kind of what I've done in my practice as well, is I've had much better success in bringing on people that are pre-licensed and just kind of helping bring them up through the ranks through supervision and that sort of thing. And I think they're maybe in a way more committed to the practice because of that to some degree. But yeah, I know just, as you have already alluded to, I know with COVID and the fact that so many more people are seeking mental health care, you're right, it's been kind of a silver lining to some degree for us from a business standpoint, that there's no lack of people wanting to get in to see us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody is thinking about making that transition from maybe agency work or working for somebody else, what would you say would be your tips, and also maybe things that you say, well, if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't have done this or that?
Yeah. So probably from a business standpoint, if I could go back, I would advise myself at the time to get a really good accountant right away,
Mm-hmm.
and not try and do that stuff by yourself, because I feel like, a lot of us are very hardworking. I know I'm hardworking, and I try to put all of that pressure on myself. And I've just realized I can't be good at everything. That's just not possible. So I think
Mm-hmm.
having a good accountant that can guide you on the financials aspect is going to be very important. I think, again, from a business standpoint, be very good about your bookkeeping and just tracking all of your expenses, tracking all of your earnings, because that's also going to be very important just in terms of running your own business at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the best thing that I would encourage is to just ask a lot of questions, talk to different clinicians, talk to different group practice owners that are willing to talk and share and learn from them, explore that with curiosity. That was the thing that honestly helped me the most, is I just asked people a lot of questions around, what are the pros of private practice? What are the cons of private practice? What are some things to consider as a business owner? That really, really helps. So I would just encourage to be curious and ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think back when I started my practice, I wish I had sought out mentors around the business side of things sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. So, as you're growing your practice, I think you said you were kind of specialize in trauma and EMDR.
Mhm.
So, how do you market that? How do you get your clients and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I think, previously a lot of it was just through some of the standard practices that I think a lot of us have, good website, Psychology Today profile, networking, word of mouth. I certainly still do that, but I've also realized just the power of social media and the power of putting yourself out there in that way. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel that a lot of my marketing right now really comes from not just some of the other stuff that I mentioned, but being on Instagram, being on TikTok, being on Facebook, just putting, my message and my name out there, because just the reach, the capacity for the type of reach you can have is quite powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really where I would say a lot of my clients are coming in right now, or at least a lot of people are maybe visiting my website through social media.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would also say is having a strong Google ranking has been really helpful for me. Again, more and more young people are going online, going on social media, or going on Google to find who might be able to help them. So that's really been, my lifeline, in addition to trying to continue to build my name in LA.
Yeah. So what kind of things do you like to post about that seem to be working for you?
I just like to share, I'm very much a realist. I'm very, I think, straightforward. So I like to share very straightforward, feedback, very straightforward recommendations online. I talk about, negative thoughts. I talk about, normalization of certain life experiences and symptoms. I really try to destigmatize trauma, and, that there's different types of trauma that we can all go through. Even
Mm-hmm.
with the example of COVID, like we all went through a collective trauma of like a massive shutdown and not knowing what was going on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to just normalize that, and just normalize that healing is possible. Everyone is resilient. If you've made it this far, you've made it this far for a
Mm-hmm.
reason. So I really like to share that, and just any other themes that come up. Recently we just had Mother's Day that passed, and how Mother's Day can be, not necessarily a happy day for some people. So I just like to be very straightforward.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it something that you're doing yourself, or are you outsourcing that?
Both.
Uh-huh.
So like I said, I don't believe that, we can be good at everything, right? So social media has also been quite a learning curve for me. I'm still the one creating all the content, but I have a designer that, makes it pretty and, uses awesome color schemes and everything. So she helps me with that, but I'm still the person, putting the message out there and creating the content.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So in your work with other folks that are working on building their private practice, what sort of things do you find that you tend to focus most with those people?
I really encourage, if you're new to private practice, just, identifying what your niche is, like who your ideal client is. How do you see yourself, putting yourself out there, what your message is in terms of what you're trying to share with people. So, I very much encourage, like, really understand who you are, both as a clinician, as a business owner, and what your mission here is. And, I also encourage that I think it's also important to be patient, because I think that there are some people that have this expectation that, like, after a few months, I'm going to have a full practice. But that's not the case. For me, I started in 2019, and it took me 2 years to feel fully comfortable to officially branch out on my own. So, I encourage, like, don't expect it to happen super quickly. And if you need, extra income, you can certainly look into side opportunities or other outsourcing opportunities. So I think that's an important message that I would like to remind as well.
Yes. And I would totally agree with that. In my experience in working with people over the years, it does take about 2 years, I think, typically to get really established, to feel established enough to where you're on kind of solid ground and the referrals are coming, and you're not having to work quite as hard to build that client base.
Right.
Yeah. So, is if the other thing that you spoke to that I think might be kind of interesting to hear your perspective is, why do you feel like creating a niche is so important?
I think it's important because, I'm not trying to rag on generalists, but like I said, I think it's hard to be good at everything. And the best example that I can give is, if a client calls me and says, I want to work on OCD, I have OCD symptoms, I don't feel like that's within my wheelhouse, and I refer out for that. I understand the symptoms. I understand, what happens with OCD, but in terms of treatment, I don't know that I'm the best person to work with on OCD. So again, I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't, know different aspects of mental health or different diagnoses. But I do think that it's important to know what you're good at, know where, maybe there's some limitations in your clinical work. And I think it's important to also follow your passion. Trauma work has always been my passion. I am, again, it's not that I'm excited for people to have gone through trauma, but I am so excited when people call me and say, this situation happened to me. I want to work on it. That makes me so excited, because I think it's amazing. I think trauma survivors are so resilient. So niching in that way is so important, because when you get those calls, it's hopefully not really going to feel like work to you.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think if as people are figuring out their niche or however we want to say that, I think it's important to pay attention to those clients, those patients that you enjoy working with the most, and what is the theme around those particular issues.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So, well, Janet, I need to be respectful of your time, and I'm so glad we connected and had you on the podcast. What sort of parting thoughts would you want to have for people just around things that you've learned so far?
Parting thoughts. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts, I guess. Well, when it comes to, the business component, again, like I said, I think it's important to understand your limitations, always ask questions, always ask for help if you can afford it. I think coaching can be great. Having mentors, like you said, can be great. And like I said, one foot in front of the other, right? Like running your own business is not for the faint of heart. So it takes time. A lot of growth opportunities can happen. And I encourage, like, if you have your own limiting beliefs around that, maybe do your own work, go to therapy. I know that I go to therapy religiously and explore my own issues. So I'm always going to recommend that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I just reminded I meet with my therapist tomorrow. So it's a good thing. And I think just to be on top of our own clinical game, I think we need to be involved in our own therapy. Couldn't agree more. So yeah. So, well, Janet, how can folks get in touch with you?
You can find me on my website, roadtowellness.co, and that's road with the number 2, wellness.co. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok at Therapy with Janet B. So you can find all of my information, all my content on there. That's probably one of the better ways to connect with me.
Thanks, Janet, for being on the podcast. Well, a big thanks to Janet again for being on the podcast. And I really loved hearing her story and just you getting to hear some of her wisdom about going into private practice and what she's learned so far about this whole private practice world. I think one of the big take-homes that I got from Janet for me is just to reaffirm the fact that you really shouldn't do too much alone, and that you should really seek out support through mentors, through your own therapist, through other people, consultants, coaching along the way is just going to help you much better in the long run. Because, being in private practice can be a lonely place. And I think seeking out people that have done it before and have had the experience of starting a practice or running a practice, and also making those transitions from, solo practice to group practice. I think having some help along the way is just going to be a good thing. So be sure to check out Janet's stuff, and you can find links here in the show notes and the show summary so that you can connect with Janet. And before we go, I also love for you to check out our sponsor of the podcast, Therapy Notes. And you can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice, and we just couldn't operate without them. They're constantly adding new things and new features that is just really on top, really will up your game by using a platform like Therapy Notes. And you can, when you go over to practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes, be sure and use the promo code Gordon, just GORDON, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. And also, if you're interested in starting your own podcast, and I would say this is one of the funnest things I do in my life is talk to people like Janet and others from literally around the world about their practices and clinical things and just all the stuff. It's a great life. And one of the things I would encourage you to do is learn how to do it, because I think you've got a story to tell and you've got a message that you can get out there, and people want to hear it. So check out the podcasting workshop, and you can just simply go to practiceoftherapy.com/podcast workshop. And it's a free email workshop that you'll get right in your inbox, several emails in a row with just short little snippets of lessons to teach you all the steps of starting a podcast. So be sure and check that out. practiceoftherapy.com/podcast workshop. Well, that's it for this particular episode, folks. So glad you've joined me in this journey. And do take time to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I look forward to being with you in the weeks and months ahead. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.